Peter Yarrow carved the turkey with the same steady precision he used to cut steel at his fabrication shop. The blade moved through meat and bone without hesitation, each slice uniform and clean. Around his dining room table, the family gathered as they had every year for the past decade. The dining room carried the warm scent of roasted turkey and cranberry sauce, mixed with the lingering smell of Taylor's apple pie cooling in the kitchen. Peter had built this table himself 5 years ago, crafting it from reclaimed oak with mortise and tenon joints that would last generations. He took pride in creating things that endured. Past the stuffing, Uncle Peter called out Judah, Bryce and Willa's 10-year-old son. The boy sat between his parents, fork already in hand, his dark hair still damp from washing up before dinner. Taylor emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter of steaks, each one seared to perfection. Steam rose from the meat, carrying the rich aroma of garlic and herbs. She had insisted on cooking steaks in addition to the turkey this year, claiming it was a special treat for the family. "I got the good cuts from Morrison's," Taylor announced, setting the platter in the center of the table with deliberate care. "Prime ribeye. Cost me a fortune, but we deserve it." Peter watched his wife arrange the steaks with unnecessary precision. Her movements seemed stiff, rehearsed. Strange for someone who usually moved through the kitchen like it was her natural habitat. Taylor had always been graceful in domestic tasks, flowing from stove to counter to sink with practiced efficiency. Today she moved like someone following written instructions. "That smells incredible, Taylor," Norma Jean said from her seat at the head of the table. Peter's mother-in-law wore her best dress, the navy blue one with pearl buttons that she reserved for special occasions. Her gray hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup applied with the precision of someone who had once worked in professional settings. "You always were the best cook in the family." Bryce cut into his steak with more force than necessary, the knife scraping against the plate. "Better than what we get at home," he said, glancing at his wife with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. That Willa's face flushed slightly, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that responding to Bryce's comments only made them worse. Instead, she focused on cutting Jeffrey's turkey into smaller pieces. "Thanks, Aunt Willa," Jeffrey said, accepting the help with the easy gratitude of a child who knew he was cared for. Jeffrey, Peter's 9-year-old son, wrinkled his nose as Taylor placed a steak on his plate. The boy pushed his chair back slightly, creating distance between himself and the food. His reaction was immediate and instinctive, the way he might pull back from a hot stove. "Daddy, it smells weird," Jeffrey said, his voice carrying that particular tone children use when something genuinely bothers them. "Like the garage cleaner." Peter's fork paused halfway to his mouth. His son had always been sensitive to smells, able to detect things others missed entirely. The pediatrician had called it hyperosmia during their last visit, explaining that Jeffrey's olfactory system was unusually acute. The condition sometimes ran in families, though Peter had never noticed it in himself. "What do you mean weird?" Peter asked, keeping his voice neutral while his mind began cataloging details. "Sharp. Chemical. Like when you clean the metal pieces before welding them." Jeffrey pushed the plate further away. "It makes my nose hurt." "Don't be dramatic, sweetheart," Norma Jean said, her voice carrying just enough edge to make it clear she considered the comment inappropriate. "Your mother worked hard on this meal. It's rude to complain, but it really does smell funny," Jeffrey insisted. He looked to his father for support. "You said I should always tell you if something smells dangerous." Peter had indeed taught Jeffrey to trust his nose around the fabrication shop. Chemical fumes could be deadly in enclosed spaces, and an early warning system was valuable. If Jeffrey detected something unusual, Peter wanted to know about it. "I'll eat it then," Judah said, reaching across the table toward Jeffrey's plate with the enthusiasm of a boy who rarely got steak at home. "If you don't want it, I do." "No." Taylor lunged forward, her hand shooting out to grab Judah's wrist before he could touch the plate. The sudden movement knocked over her water glass, sending liquid streaming across the white tablecloth and onto the hardwood floor. "Don't eat that." The room fell silent. Even the soft jazz playing from the kitchen radio seemed to stop. Everyone stared at Taylor, who stood frozen with her hand still gripping Judah's wrist hard enough to leave white marks on his skin. Peter set down his fork and studied his wife's face. Real fear lived in her eyes, not the mild annoyance of a hostess dealing with a picky child. This was the look of someone whose carefully laid plans had been threatened. "Mom, you're hurting me," Judas said, trying to pull his wrist free. Taylor released him as if she had been shocked. "I'm sorry. It was undercooked." She grabbed Jeffrey's plate and hurried toward the kitchen, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. "I need to put it back on the heat." "Looked fine to me," Bryce mumbled, cutting into his own steak. Peter's brother-in-law had always been quick to comment on everything, but now he seemed focused entirely on his plate, avoiding eye contact with anyone else at the table. Peter watched the interplay between Bryce and Taylor with new attention. His brother-in-law's comment felt forced, like someone reading lines from a script. And Taylor's reaction had been too extreme for simple embarrassment about undercooked meat. Willa reached across the table to clean up the spilled water with her napkin, her movements careful and methodical. "Accidents happen," she said quietly, her voice carrying that careful neutrality she had perfected over years of marriage to Bryce. "No harm done. Can I have some turkey instead?" Jeffrey asked, his voice small in the aftermath of the commotion. "Of course," Peter said, cutting a generous slice from the bird. "Turkey's better anyway. More traditional." Through the kitchen doorway, Peter could see Taylor scraping the steak into the garbage disposal. The meat disappeared with a grinding sound that seemed unusually loud in the quiet house. Strange behavior for someone who claimed the meat was simply undercooked. An undercooked steak could be returned to the heat. There was no reason to destroy it completely. "Everything all right in there, honey?" Norma Jean called toward the kitchen. "Fine," Taylor replied, but her voice was strained. "Just cleaning up." The conversation gradually resumed, but Peter's attention remained divided. He ate mechanically, responding to questions and comments while his mind worked through what he had witnessed. Taylor's panic had been genuine, instinctive, and completely out of proportion to the situation. Not the reaction of someone annoyed by a picky child, but the response of someone whose carefully laid plans had been threatened by an unexpected variable. Jeffrey's hyperosmia had detected something that shouldn't have been in the food. Taylor's violent reaction to prevent another child from eating the same food suggested she knew exactly what that something was. And her immediate destruction of the evidence meant she understood the implications if someone investigated further. After dinner, Peter helped clear the table while the others moved to the living room. The sounds of football commentary drifted from the television, mixed with Judah's excited commentary about the game. Taylor worked beside Peter in unusual silence, loading the dishwasher with sharp, efficient movements that spoke of barely controlled tension. "You seemed upset about Jeffrey's steak," Peter said, his voice casual as he scraped plates. "Kids can be ungrateful," Taylor replied without looking at him, her hands moving mechanically as she arranged dishes in the washer. "I spend hours cooking, and he complains about the smell. He has that condition. The doctor said his sense of smell is unusually strong. Remember?" Taylor's hands stilled on a plate, gripping it tightly enough that Peter worried it might crack. "I know what the doctor said." Peter waited for her to continue, but she remained silent. The kitchen felt heavy with unspoken tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air pressure changes and animals grow restless. He carried the leftover turkey to the refrigerator, noting that Taylor had already disposed of all the remaining steaks. Unusual, since she typically saved leftovers for days, creating elaborate meals from Sunday's roast or Tuesday's chicken. Food waste went against Taylor's nature and her careful household budgeting. "Shame to throw away all that expensive meat," Peter said. "It was contaminated." Taylor snapped, then caught herself. "I mean, if one was bad, they all might be. Better safe than sorry." Peter nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense, but his engineer's mind rejected the logic. Bacterial contamination didn't work that way. If one steak from a package was spoiled, you could smell or see the problem. You didn't need to dispose of perfectly good meat from the same batch. The next morning, Peter discovered the garbage cans were empty. Not just empty, they had been wheeled to the curb and collected, despite the fact that pickup wasn't scheduled until Monday. It was Friday that he stood in his driveway in the early morning cold, staring at the spotless garbage cans that had been returned to their usual position beside the garage. The waste management company charged $50 for special pickups, money Taylor rarely spent without consulting him first. She was careful with household expenses, tracking every purchase in a notebook she kept by the telephone. Peter found Taylor in the kitchen, scrubbing the counter with more intensity than necessary. She wore her blue terry cloth robe and slippers, but her hair was already styled and her makeup applied. Strange for someone who typically didn't get dressed until after his second cup of coffee. "Did you take the trash out early?" he asked, pouring himself coffee from the pot Taylor had made. "The smell was bothering me," she said without turning around, her scrubbing motion never pausing. "I called the company. They picked it up as a favor." Peter sipped his coffee and considered this explanation. Taylor had never been bothered by garbage smells before. She composted kitchen scraps and regularly cleaned out the refrigerator without complaint. Suddenly being sensitive to normal household odors didn't fit her character. "That was expensive, wasn't it? Special pickup. We can afford it." Her response came too quickly, too defensive. "It's not like we're poor." But they weren't rich either. Peter ran a successful fabrication business, but they lived within careful budgets. Taylor clipped coupons and waited for sales. She would normally complain about an unexpected $50 expense, not dismiss it as insignificant. Peter watched his wife clean the same spot on the counter for the third time. Her movements had an obsessive quality, as if the surface would never be clean enough. The Taylor he knew was efficient in her cleaning, thorough but not compulsive. Later that morning, Jeffrey found Peter in the garage working on a custom railing order for the courthouse renovation project. The boy sat on an overturned bucket, watching his father measure and mark steel beams with the fascination of someone learning craft. "Dad," Jeffrey said, "about that steak last night." Peter looked up from his measuring tape. "What about it?" "It smelled like that stuff you said can make people sick if you breathe it." Jeffrey pointed toward the shelf where Peter kept his solvents and cleaners. "The one in the blue bottle." Peter's hands stilled on the measuring tape. The blue bottle contained acetone, which he used for cleaning metal before welding. The solvent removed oils and residues that could compromise weld integrity. He had warned Jeffrey about the dangers of inhaling chemical fumes during one of the boys' visits to the shop, explaining how invisible vapors could damage lungs and brain tissue. "Are you sure?" Peter asked, keeping his voice calm while his mind raced through implications. "Yeah, same smell exactly. Sharp and clean, but wrong. Like it doesn't belong in food." Peter walked to the shelf and examined the acetone bottle. The level seemed lower than he remembered, but he couldn't be certain. He used the solvent regularly for work, and the amount could be explained by normal use. Still, combined with Taylor's panic at dinner and the suspicious disposal of evidence, the missing acetone created a pattern that made Peter's stomach tighten with cold recognition. Acetone was highly toxic if ingested. A few drops in food would cause severe illness. A larger dose could be fatal. The chemical was readily available, left no distinctive taste in large quantities of food, and would be difficult to detect in an autopsy unless specifically tested for. "Jeffrey," Peter said carefully, kneeling down to his son's eye level, "I need you to promise me something. If you ever smell something funny in your food again, don't eat it. Come find me right away." "Okay, Dad. Are you worried about something?" Peter looked at his son's trusting face and felt something cold settle in his chest. Jeffrey had always been perceptive, able to read emotions and situations with unusual clarity for his age. The boy deserved honesty, but not the full truth of what his father was beginning to understand. "I'm always careful about safety," Peter said. "That's what keeps us protected. Your nose is like an early warning system. We need to trust it, like a smoke detector for dangerous smells." Exactly like that. Jeffrey seemed satisfied with this explanation, but Peter's mind continued working through the implications. If Taylor had attempted to poison him with acetone, Jeffrey's hyperosmia had saved not just Peter's life, but potentially Judah's as well. The thought of his nephew ingesting a toxic substance because of Taylor's carelessness sent anger coursing through Peter's veins. That afternoon, while Jeffrey played with neighbor children, Peter conducted a more thorough investigation of his garage. He inventoried every chemical container, noting levels and checking for signs of tampering. Most appeared normal, but the acetone bottle showed definite evidence of recent use beyond his own needs. More concerning, he found traces of acetone residue on a small glass dropper that he didn't recognize. The dropper had been hidden behind paint cans on a high shelf, placed where it wouldn't be accidentally discovered. Someone had used his garage as a laboratory for preparing poison. That afternoon, while Taylor visited her sister, Peter sat in his home office reviewing their financial documents. He performed this task quarterly, checking account balances and insurance policies with the same methodical approach he used for everything else. Organization and attention to detail had made his business successful and kept his family secure. The life insurance file contained a document he had never seen before. The policy was for $750,000, with Peter as the insured and Taylor as the beneficiary. The application was dated 3 weeks ago, and it bore what appeared to be Peter's signature in blue ink. Peter stared at the signature for several minutes, comparing it to his authentic signature on other documents. The handwriting looked remarkably similar to his own, but subtle differences caught his trained eye. The angle of certain letters was wrong. The pressure of the pen strokes was inconsistent. Most importantly, he had no memory of signing any insurance documents, and a policy of this size would have required a medical examination that had never taken place. He flipped to the next page and found the witness signature, Norma Jean Pelham, dated the same day as his supposed signature. Oregon law required witness signatures on certain legal documents, but Peter couldn't remember his mother-in-law being present for any financial meetings. Peter opened his laptop and accessed the metadata for the PDF file. The document properties revealed it had been submitted online from an IP address he didn't recognize. A quick internet search identified the IP as belonging to Taylor's workplace, the dental office where she worked as a receptionist 3 days a week. His hands remained steady as he photographed each page of the policy with his phone, but his mind raced through implications. A forged signature, a witness who was Taylor's mother, a policy applied for online from Taylor's office, and a stake that had smelled like acetone to his hypersensitive son. Peter had served 2 years in Army engineering before starting his fabrication business, working on logistics and supply systems that required precise coordination of multiple components. He understood how complex operations functioned, how small elements combined to create larger mechanisms designed for specific purposes. What he was looking at wasn't a collection of coincidences, it was a machine designed with deadly efficiency. He called the insurance company from his cell phone, speaking to a representative who confirmed the policy was active and that all documentation appeared to be in order according to their initial review. "I'd like to flag this policy as potentially fraudulent," Peter said, his voice calm and professional. "Can you explain the nature of your concern, Mr. Yarrow? I never signed the application. The signature is forged, and I can prove it." The representative's tone became more formal and alert. "We'll need to investigate this immediately, sir. Insurance fraud is a serious federal crime. A fraud investigation will freeze the policy until we can determine what happened. That's exactly what I want. I also want a copy of all documentation sent to my attorney. We'll need you to file a formal complaint in writing and provide evidence of the forgery. I'll have that to you by Monday." After hanging up, Peter sat in his office chair and stared at the wall where he had hung his Army commendation and his first business license. 20 years of marriage, and Taylor had been planning his death with the same careful attention to detail she used when organizing household expenses or planning birthday parties. The insurance policy alone was damning, but combined with the acetone evidence and her panic at dinner, it painted a picture of premeditated murder. Not a crime of passion or desperation, but a calculated plan executed over weeks or months. She had researched methods, forged documents, enlisted accomplices, and begun implementation. The cold feeling in his chest expanded, but it wasn't fear. Peter had never been afraid of problems that could be solved through logic and planning. What he felt was the calm, focused anger of a man who had identified a threat to his family and was prepared to eliminate it with surgical precision. Taylor had made one critical error in her planning. She had underestimated her target. Peter wasn't just a small business owner who could be easily disposed of. He was a combat engineer who understood systems, logistics, and the importance of superior intelligence in any conflict. The war had begun, but Taylor didn't know it yet. Peter didn't confront Taylor about the forged insurance policy. Confrontation would alert her to his knowledge and potentially drive her underground or cause her to accelerate her timeline. Instead, he began gathering intelligence with the same systematic approach he had learned in the Army and refined through years of complex fabrication projects. Military engineering had taught him that successful operations required thorough reconnaissance before taking action. You identified your target, mapped their resources and capabilities, determined their vulnerabilities, and then struck with overwhelming force at the optimal moment. He started with their shared Google account, which Taylor had insisted they use for family photos and documents. She had claimed it would be convenient for sharing pictures with relatives and storing important files. Peter had agreed, not realizing he was creating a surveillance opportunity for future use. Taylor had always been careless about digital security, never bothering to change default settings or review sharing permissions. She used the same simple password for everything and never cleared her browsing history or deleted temporary files. What she thought was convenient, Peter now recognized as operational negligence. The Google Photos archive revealed 2 months of images that Taylor had apparently forgotten to delete. Screenshots of text conversations with someone identified only as B, conversations that began as complaints about their marriage and evolved into something much more intimate and conspiratorial that B. Can't stop thinking about yesterday, Taylor. Me too. Wish we could be together all the time, B. Soon, maybe. If things change, Taylor, they will. I'm working on it. The timestamp on the messages corresponded with dates when Taylor had claimed to be shopping or visiting her mother. Peter cross-referenced the timing with his own schedule and found that every conversation had occurred when he was at the shop or out of town for business. The pattern revealed systematic deception spanning months. Peter knew only one person in their family whose name started with B. Bryce, his brother-in-law. The man who sat at Peter's table, ate Peter's food, and apparently was planning to take Peter's place, that he accessed Taylor's tablet, which remained connected to their shared Wi-Fi network and automatically synced with her phone. The device contained a complete archive of messages that painted a detailed picture of an affair that had been ongoing for 8 months. More importantly, recent messages revealed Taylor's growing frustration with their financial situation and her desire for independence without the inconvenience of divorce proceedings. Taylor, I'm tired of asking him for money for everything, B. Leave him then, Taylor, and live in poverty? He owns everything, Taylor. There has to be another way, B. What kind of way? Taylor, I'm figuring it out. The messages from 3 weeks ago became more specific and chilling. Taylor, what if something happened to him? B, what do you mean? Taylor, accidents happen. Insurance pays out, B. That's crazy talk, Taylor. Is it? We could be together and never worry about money again, B. You're scaring me, Taylor. Don't be scared. B, ready. Peter screenshot each conversation, storing the images in an encrypted folder on his personal laptop. He had learned long ago that evidence was worthless if it couldn't be preserved and presented properly. Chain of custody mattered in legal proceedings, and digital evidence required special handling to maintain its integrity. The final exchange, dated just 4 days ago, revealed the operational timeline. Taylor, it's almost ready, B. What's almost ready? Taylor, the plan. Everything's in place, B. I don't want to know details, Taylor. You will soon enough. We both will. Peter scheduled a meeting with his business attorney under the pretense of discussing liability insurance for the fabrication shop. David Rodriguez had handled Peter's legal affairs for 7 years, drafting contracts and resolving the occasional dispute with suppliers or customers. The attorney's office occupied the 3rd floor of a downtown building that had been renovated to maintain its historic character while providing modern amenities. Rodriguez had chosen the location carefully, projecting success without ostentation. What can I help you with today, Peter? Rodriguez asked, gesturing toward the leather chairs arranged around a small conference table. I wanted to discuss some insurance questions, Peter said, settling into his chair with apparent casualness. Hypothetically, what would happen if someone forged a life insurance application? Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from casual interest to professional attention. That's a federal crime under several statutes. Insurance fraud carries serious penalties, especially when the policy amount is substantial. We're talking about potential prison sentences measured in years, not months. What if there is evidence of premeditated harm, planning to cause the death in order to collect the insurance? Then you're talking about attempted murder with insurance fraud as the underlying motive. That's a felony in Oregon, with potential federal charges if mail or wire fraud is involved. Rodriguez studied Peter's face with the intensity of someone who had spent decades reading clients. This isn't hypothetical, is it? Peter met his attorney's gaze steadily. What would you advise someone in that situation? Document everything with forensic precision. Preserve all evidence using proper chain of custody procedures. Report it to law enforcement and the insurance company immediately. Rodriguez paused, choosing his words carefully. And protect all assets before the other party realizes they've been discovered. How would someone protect their assets? Transfer real property into trusts or LLCs. Close joint accounts and establish individual credit lines. Remove the other party's access to business accounts and decision-making authority. Rodriguez pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. The key is to act quickly but carefully. Any transfers that appear to be attempts to hide assets from legitimate claims can be reversed by courts. But if the claims aren't legitimate, if someone is planning to murder you for insurance money, they have no legitimate claim to anything. The law doesn't protect criminals from the consequences of their actions. That afternoon, Peter visited his bank and initiated a series of carefully planned financial maneuvers. He transferred the house deed into a revocable trust with himself as the sole trustee, a legal structure that would protect the property while allowing him to maintain full control. That he restructured his business ownership to flow entirely through his existing LLC, removing Taylor's name from all documents and signature authorities. The changes appeared routine, the kind of estate planning that successful business owners often implemented for tax and liability reasons. Peter closed their joint credit accounts and opened new ones in his name only, citing identity theft concerns as justification for the changes. He established new checking and savings accounts at a different bank, one where Taylor had never conducted business. The by evening, Taylor had lost access to their shared finances without realizing it. The credit cards she carried would be declined the next time she tried to use them, but Peter wanted to control the timing of that discovery. He needed her to remain unaware of his knowledge for several more days while he completed his intelligence gathering. Peter installed security cameras in the kitchen and garage, positioning them to capture clear views of the food preparation areas and chemical storage locations. The system was professional grade, designed for commercial applications but scaled for residential use. Oregon law required visible notification of recording devices in private residences, so he posted the required signs in compliance with state regulations. The legal requirement worked in his favor, providing cover for his surveillance operation while ensuring any evidence he gathered would be admissible in court. "What's with the cameras?" Taylor asked when she noticed them the next morning, standing in the kitchen doorway with her coffee mug suspended halfway to her lips. "Had some tools stolen from the shop last month." Peter lied smoothly, his tone carrying just the right amount of frustration about the fictional theft. "Want to keep better track of who's coming and going around here." "But why in the kitchen?" "System came with 4 cameras. Figured I might as well use them all instead of wasting the equipment." Taylor seemed to accept the explanation, but Peter noticed she spent more time studying the camera positions than seemed natural. She walked through the kitchen several times that day, pausing to look up at the small black devices mounted in the corners. That evening, Peter observed her examining the camera angles with the systematic attention of someone planning around an obstacle. She was learning the blind spots, testing the range of coverage, and calculating how to avoid detection. In the garage, Peter prepared his trap with the precision of an engineer designing a critical system. He purchased a bottle identical to his acetone container and filled it with a mixture of water, blue food coloring, and peppermint extract. The solution looked like acetone and had a strong, chemical-like smell that would be noticeable to anyone attempting to use it. The peppermint extract provided a distinctive odor that would be detectable in food, while the food coloring ensured any tampering would be visible. If Taylor attempted to poison him again, she would unknowingly use a harmless mixture while being recorded in the act. He swapped the labels with surgical precision, placing the fake solution where the real acetone had been stored and moving the actual chemical to a locked cabinet in his office. The substitution was invisible unless someone tested the liquid's actual properties. Peter tested the camera angles multiple times, ensuring they would capture anyone tampering with drinks or food in the kitchen. The high-definition system recorded continuously to a digital storage unit hidden in the basement, creating a permanent record of all activity. 3 days later, his trap worked perfectly. Peter had left a glass of water on the kitchen counter before taking Jeffrey to school, positioning it within clear view of 2 cameras. When he returned an hour later, the glass remained exactly where he had placed it, but the water level had increased slightly. The camera footage told the complete story. At 8:47 a.m., Taylor entered the kitchen wearing her blue robe and slippers. She looked around carefully, checking for observers, then retrieved a small glass dropper from behind the coffee maker. She approached Peter's water glass and added several drops of clear liquid. Stirring it with a spoon, she then rinsed and replaced in the drawer. Taylor had been careful to use the fake acetone mixture from the garage, believing she was poisoning her husband's drinking water. Her face showed no hesitation, no regret, no emotion at all. She had performed the task with the casual efficiency of someone making coffee or feeding a pet. Peter poured the contaminated water down the sink and watched the recording 3 more times, analyzing every detail. Taylor's body language was confident, practiced. This wasn't her first attempt at poisoning him. It was simply the first time he had been prepared to document it. That evening, Peter made a show of drinking from a different glass, while Taylor watched with visible anticipation. She found excuses to remain in the kitchen, cleaning counters that were already clean and reorganizing cabinets that were already organized. Her eyes kept returning to Peter, watching for signs of distress or illness. When he showed no symptoms after an hour, her disappointment was obvious. She excused herself early, claiming a headache, but Peter could hear her moving around upstairs for hours after she supposedly went to bed. 2 weeks later, Peter invited the family for another dinner, presenting it as a casual get-together to maintain normal routines. He prepared the meal himself this time, grilling steaks in the backyard while Taylor watched from the kitchen window with barely concealed anxiety. "You don't usually cook," she said when he brought the meat inside, her voice carrying forced casualness that didn't mask her underlying tension. "Thought I'd try something different. Maybe I've been missing out." Peter had purchased the steaks himself, kept them in a cooler at the shop until preparation time, and never let them out of his sight. He seasoned and cooked them personally, ensuring no one else had opportunity to tamper with the food. He poured wine for the adults and served the meal with deliberate care, making conversation about Jeffrey's school activities and upcoming projects at the fabrication shop. To outside observers, he appeared relaxed and normal, but every action was calculated. Peter drank from a bottle of water he had opened himself, making sure Taylor could see him breaking the seal and taking the first sip. He had learned that visible security measures often revealed as much about an adversary's intentions as hidden surveillance. Throughout dinner, Taylor seemed increasingly nervous. She picked at her food, eating small bites without apparent enjoyment, and kept glancing at Peter's water bottle as if willing it to produce some effect. Her conversation felt forced, as if she was following a mental script rather than participating naturally in family discussion. She asked Jeffrey about school with unusual interest, complimented Willa's dress with excessive enthusiasm, and praised the weather with the kind of artificial cheerfulness that made everyone slightly uncomfortable. "This is delicious, Peter," Willa said, cutting her steak with obvious pleasure. "You should cook more often. You have a real talent for it." "Maybe I will." Peter cut his own steak with steady hands, chewing thoughtfully. "Been thinking about making some changes around here." Taylor's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What kind of changes?" "Business changes. Life changes. Time to clean house, get rid of things that don't belong." The comment was deliberately ambiguous, but Peter watched Taylor's face for reactions. She understood the potential implications, even if she couldn't be certain they were directed at her. Bryce shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What kind of business changes? Expanding the operation. Maybe taking on some bigger contracts. Government work pays well if you can handle the security requirements. Peter let that comment settle over the table. Government contracts required extensive background checks and security clearances. Anyone involved in criminal activity would be automatically disqualified, and ongoing monitoring would detect any legal problems that developed. After everyone left, Peter excused himself to the bathroom and took several drops of ipecac syrup he had purchased for this specific purpose. The medication was designed to induce vomiting in cases of accidental poisoning, and it would produce convincing symptoms without causing actual harm. Within an hour, Peter was genuinely nauseated and running a mild fever. The symptoms would be noticeable but not dangerous, lasting just long enough to serve his purposes. "I don't feel well," he told Taylor as he headed to bed early, one hand pressed to his stomach for dramatic effect. Taylor's concerns seemed genuine, but Peter caught her checking her phone repeatedly throughout the evening. She was probably updating someone on his condition, reporting on the success or failure of her latest attempt. Around midnight, Peter heard Taylor making a quiet phone call from the kitchen. He couldn't make out the words, but her tone was frustrated, almost angry. Whatever she had expected to happen wasn't occurring on schedule. 2 days later, while Taylor was at work, Peter called Willa and asked her to meet him at the fabrication shop. She arrived looking puzzled but curious, wearing a simple blue dress and carrying the small purse she always brought to family gatherings. "What's this about, Peter?" she asked, following him through the shop floor toward his office. "You sounded serious on the phone." The fabrication shop hummed with activity around them. Peter's 2 employees were working on a large custom gate order, the sound of cutting and welding providing background noise that would mask their conversation from potential eavesdropping. He led Willa to his office and closed the door, ensuring they would have complete privacy. The office was spartanly furnished but organized with military precision. Everything in its proper place, every surface clean and functional. "I need to show you something, but it's going to be difficult to see," Peter said, settling behind his desk while Willa took the chair across from him. Peter opened his laptop and displayed the screenshots of text messages between Taylor and Bryce. He watched Willa's face as she read the intimate conversations between her husband and her sister, documenting months of betrayal and deception. "How long?" Willa asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her hands gripping the arms of her chair until her knuckles went white. 8 months, based on these messages. Probably longer before they started putting it in writing. Willa stared at the screen for several minutes, reading through the conversations that detailed not just physical infidelity, but emotional intimacy that made the betrayal more painful. "I suspected something. The way they looked at each other during family gatherings. The excuses Bryce made for working late. The phone calls he took in private." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "But I told myself I was being paranoid. That marriage made me suspicious and jealous. I didn't want to believe my own sister would do this." "There's more," Peter said gently. He showed her the video footage of Taylor tampering with his water glass, explaining the context and the significance of what they were watching. Willa's hand flew to her mouth as she understood what she was seeing. "Oh my God, she's trying to kill you. She forged my signature on a life insurance policy for $750,000. Her mother witnessed the signature, making Norma Jean an accomplice. The plan was to poison me and collect the money so she and Bryce could be together without financial concerns." Peter showed Willa additional evidence: the forged insurance documents, the chemical analysis of the acetone residue, Jeffrey's testimony about the smell detection, and the financial transfers Taylor had been researching. "Are you going to the police?" Willa asked, her voice steady despite the emotional shock of what she was learning. "Yes, but I need your help first. Do you have any evidence of their affair? Text messages, emails, anything that proves the relationship from your end?" Willa was quiet for several minutes, staring at her hands while she processed the implications. Her marriage was over. Her sister was a would-be murderer, and she was being asked to help build a criminal case against both of them. Finally, she looked up with new determination in her eyes. Bryce keeps his old phones in a shoebox in our closet. He never deletes anything because he's too lazy to manage his digital storage. And Taylor sent me some strange messages a few weeks ago that I didn't understand at the time. What kind of messages? She asked about life insurance. Wanted to know if Bryce and I had policies on each other, what the coverage amounts were, how the payout process worked. Willow pulled out her phone and scrolled through her message history. Then she said something that seemed like casual conversation, but now it sounded like a threat. She found a message and showed it to Peter. Here, she said, Peter won't live to collect retirement. None of them will. We need to be smart about protecting ourselves financially. Peter screenshot the message, adding it to his growing evidence file. Will you give me a written statement about what you've observed? The affair, the suspicious conversations, any unusual behavior? Yes. But Peter, what happens to Jeffrey when this comes out? And to Judah? Our children are going to be caught in the middle of this. Jeffrey comes with me. Taylor loses all parental rights when she's convicted of attempted murder. As for Judah, that depends on what kind of mother you choose to be after this is over. Willa nodded slowly, understanding that she was facing her own crossroads. I'll help you, but I want full custody of Judah, and I want Bryce to pay for what he's done to our family. I'll make sure your attorney gets copies of everything. Adultery and conspiracy to commit murder will give you significant leverage in divorce proceedings. Peter spent the next week compiling his evidence into a comprehensive package that would withstand legal scrutiny and provide prosecutors with everything needed for conviction. He organized the materials chronologically, creating a timeline that showed the progression of Taylor's plan from affair to forgery to attempted murder. His military training had emphasized the importance of thorough documentation and clear presentation of complex information. Officers needed to make decisions based on accurate intelligence, and intelligence was only valuable if it could be communicated effectively. The evidence file included screenshots of forged insurance documents with complete metadata showing submission from Taylor's workplace, computer high-definition video footage of Taylor tampering with his drinking water, enhanced and time-stamped text message evidence of the 8-month affair between Taylor and Bryce, including discussions of their murder. Conspiracy audio recordings from Taylor's synced voicemail system, where she discussed finally being free and not having to ask permission anymore. Financial records showing Peter's asset protection measures and Taylor's research into insurance claim procedures, Willa's written statement detailing suspicious conversations, and observed behavior documentation of Jeffrey's hyperosmia condition and his detection of chemical odors in food chemical analysis of acetone residue found on dropper equipment. Hidden in Peter's garage, Peter arranged meetings with 3 parties on the same day. His attorney, David Rodriguez, Detective Maria Rivera from the police department's fraud unit, and Special Agent Thomas Chun from the insurance company's investigation division. He presented identical evidence packages to each party, walking them through the timeline and explaining how each piece of evidence supported the conclusion that Taylor had planned and attempted to murder him for insurance money. Detective Rivera, who had worked financial crimes for 15 years, studied the materials with growing professional interest. She had seen many insurance fraud cases, but few with such comprehensive documentation and clear premeditation. This is remarkably thorough, Mr. Yarrow, she said, flipping through the organized folders. Most victims don't think to preserve digital evidence this systematically, and they certainly don't set up surveillance operations to document ongoing crimes. I learned documentation procedures in the Army. Problems don't get solved without accurate information, and evidence doesn't preserve itself. We'll need to interview the other parties involved: your brother-in-law, your mother-in-law, your sister-in-law. Are you prepared for this to become public? Murder conspiracy cases generate significant media attention. I'm prepared for justice, whatever form that takes. Special Agent Chun reviewed the insurance fraud evidence with particular attention to the digital forensics. The metadata on these documents is solid gold for prosecution. We can prove exactly when and where the fraudulent application was submitted, and the forged signature analysis will hold up in federal court. How long before arrests are made? Peter asked. We'll coordinate with local law enforcement, but I'd estimate 72 hours. We need to move quickly once the investigation becomes active. Flight risk increases dramatically when suspects realize they've been discovered. Taylor was arrested at her workplace 3 days later, handcuffed in the dental office parking lot as patients and coworkers watched through the windows. Peter wasn't present for the arrest, but Willa called him afterward to describe the scene she had witnessed from across the street. She kept saying it was all a misunderstanding, Willa reported, her voice carrying a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. That someone had set her up, that the evidence was fake. She asked for her mother and demanded to call Bryce. Did she resist? No, but she was loud, kept insisting she was innocent and that you were the real criminal. The police had to put her in the car while she was still yelling. Norma Jean was arrested the same afternoon at her apartment, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory to attempted murder for her role in witnessing the forged insurance documents. At 61, she faced the possibility of spending her remaining years in prison. Bryce was brought in for questioning, but not immediately arrested. However, faced with evidence of the affair and Taylor's recorded statements about their plans together, he eventually agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. Peter met with his divorce attorney the day after Taylor's arrest. The evidence of attempted murder would void any claim Taylor might have had to marital assets under Oregon law, which protected innocent spouses from criminal partners. She'll get nothing, the attorney confirmed with professional satisfaction. Attempted murder of a spouse forfeits all marital rights under state law. The house, the business, all assets remain with you. What about custody of Jeffrey? Full custody with no visitation rights. Oregon courts don't grant parental access to someone convicted of trying to murder the child's other parent. Jeffrey will be completely protected from any contact with his mother. The legal proceedings moved with unusual speed once Taylor's public defender reviewed the evidence. Video footage of poisoning attempts, forged insurance documents, recorded conspiracy conversations, and multiple witness statements created an overwhelming case for the prosecution. Faced with the certainty of conviction and the possibility of life imprisonment, Taylor accepted a plea agreement that sentenced her to 12 years for attempted murder and insurance fraud. The plea also required her to pay restitution for legal costs and punitive damages. Norma Jean received 3 years of house arrest and was legally prohibited from any contact with Jeffrey. The sentence was lighter due to her age and supposedly limited involvement, but electronic monitoring would ensure compliance that Bryce's marriage to Willa ended in divorce within 2 months. She received a substantial settlement based on evidence of his affair and cooperation in the murder conspiracy, ensuring financial security for herself and Judah. Peter sold the house 6 months later, unable to live comfortably in a place where someone had repeatedly tried to poison him. The new house was smaller but well-built, with a large backyard perfect for Jeffrey's activities and close enough to the fabrication shop for easy commuting. The relocation represented more than a change of address. It was a symbolic break from the past and an investment in the future. Peter chose every feature of the new house with Jeffrey's needs in mind, from the bedroom layout to the garage workshop where they could work on projects together. Jeffrey adjusted to their new life with the resilience that children often display in difficult circumstances, though Peter arranged for professional counseling to help his son process the trauma of learning his mother had tried to kill his father. "Do you miss her?" Jeffrey asked one evening as they worked together in Peter's home workshop, sanding wood for a bookshelf they were building. "I miss who I thought she was," Peter replied carefully, choosing words that would be honest without being harmful. "But that person never really existed. The real Taylor was someone different. I don't miss her. She scared me, even before I knew what she was doing." Peter looked at his son, who was carefully sanding a piece of wood with the concentration of someone much older than his years. Jeffrey had always been perceptive, and his instincts about people were usually accurate. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Peter said. "She can't hurt us now, and she never will again." The fabrication business grew significantly as Peter channeled his energy into work and expansion. He hired 2 additional employees and invested in new equipment that allowed him to take on larger, more complex projects. The insurance company's settlement for the fraudulent policy provided capital for growth in Jeffrey's college fund. Peter received regular updates on Taylor's status through the victim notification system. She had been moved between facilities twice due to disciplinary problems and had made several unsuccessful appeals of her conviction. Each appeal was denied based on the overwhelming evidence of her crimes. Taylor wrote letters from prison, but Peter instructed the Postal Service to return all correspondence unopened. He had no interest in her explanations, apologies, or attempts at manipulation. Their relationship had ended the moment she decided to poison him, and nothing she could say would change that fundamental fact. Some people believed in redemption and healing, in the possibility that criminals could change and deserve second chances. Peter believed in consequences and protection. Taylor had made her choices, and now she would live with the result for the rest of her life that on a Saturday evening in early fall, Peter and Jeffrey built a fire pit in their backyard. They worked together throughout the afternoon, mixing concrete, arranging stones, and creating something permanent and useful that would serve them for years to come. The project required patience and precision qualities that Jeffrey was learning through his father's example. Each stone had to be placed carefully, each measurement checked twice, each joint sealed properly to prevent future problems. As the sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows across their work, Peter lit the first fire in their new pit. The flames danced against the gathering darkness, warm and clean, consuming the dried wood they had gathered from fallen branches around their property. Jeffrey sat beside him on the wooden bench they had built together earlier that summer. The boy had grown taller over the past year, and his face was losing some of the softness of childhood. He was becoming someone Peter could talk to as an equal, someone who could understand complex truths without being damaged by them. "Dad," Jeffrey said, watching the flames flicker and dance, "is Mom ever coming back?" Peter had known this question would come eventually. Jeffrey was old enough now to understand that his mother's absence wasn't temporary, that the changes in their lives were permanent. "No," Peter said simply. "Some people leave by choice. Others are removed because they become dangerous. Your mother chose to become dangerous." Jeffrey nodded, as if this explanation made perfect sense to him. "I'm glad she's gone. I feel safer now." Peter reached into his pocket and pulled out Taylor's wedding ring, which he had kept in his desk drawer for months, uncertain what to do with it. The gold band represented 20 years of marriage, but those years had been built on lies and deception. The ring had no value beyond the metal it was made from. Without ceremony, Peter dropped the wedding ring into the flames. The gold didn't melt immediately in the wood fire, but it began to glow red-hot, absorbing heat that would eventually change its structure completely. "Are you sad?" Jeffrey asked, watching the ring disappear into the fire. "No," Peter said, and realized he was telling the truth. "Fire burns away what doesn't belong. What's left is stronger." They stayed by the fire until late that night, father and son, watching the flames consume the past and forge something new from what remained. The fire pit would become a gathering place for years to come, a symbol of survival and renewal, built from the ashes of betrayal and strengthened by truth. When the fire finally died down to glowing coals, Peter and Jeffrey walked back to their house together. Behind them, the fire pit radiated warmth into the cool night air, a beacon of light in the darkness that would never be extinguished.